Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Rants Show. This episode is all about American public education, the American public school system. Now, I could talk about the American public school system for hours, but today I'm going to focus solely on geometry. Now, if you were in school, you know what geometry is for sure. If you're out of school, you probably learned geometry, but you forgot it because it's pointless. And that's not a pun, because triangles have points, if you didn't pick up on that. I want to talk about geometry. Now, one could argue that 90% of what you learn in school is completely useless and completely arbitrary unless you go into a specific field. One could make that argument. But at the same time, it's good to be grammatically correct. It's good to know, U.S. history. It's good to know your basic world history so that we don't repeat the same mistakes, of course. Some math is useful. Obviously, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. That's incredibly useful. Also, percentages. If you go out to eat, you need to know how to calculate that tip. It's important. You don't want to be that guy who, always has to pull out the calculator to calculate the tip. It's unbecoming. But geometry is different. Geometry is useless, unfortunately. Geometry is useless. Unless you're like an engineer or an architect, which I'm guessing if you're listening to this shitty show, you probably are not an architect or an engineer. Geometry legitimately serves zero purpose for the average person. Zero. The average person will have to calculate a tip in their life. They'll have to calculate 20% of their restaurant bill in their life. But the average person will never need to know the difference between, isosceles triangles. They'll never need to know what an acute angle means. When you're shopping for homes, when you're looking at apartments, you're not looking for acute angles. That's just not something you're looking for. You're looking for price per square foot, which is math. It's not geometry. And the problem that I have with geometry is it is obviously, beginner geometry is very basic. I remember in high school, I had a geometry class that it was legitimately challenging. I mean, it was truly like calculating angles and memorizing like vocabulary and terms related to angles and knowing the difference between all the triangles and knowing the difference between, parallel lines and intersecting lines. And I'm sorry, folks, if you're an architect or engineer out there, but that shit is pointless. That shit sucks. It sucks to learn, and it sucks not using it. Why do you learn something if you don't use it? Now, like I said, there's a few things in school that are completely pointless, but most of in school, like let's say you learn 100% of what you need to know for math, you maybe use 10% of it. That's fine. That 10% is incredibly useful. Like I said, you need to know multiplication, you need to know division, you need to know percentages. You need to. I want you to think very carefully the last time you used geometry. Think about it. What were you doing at that moment in your life? What were you doing? Who were you with? What was going on in your life when you needed to recall your prior education? What was happening? freeze frame that moment in time and think about it deeply. What were you doing? Now, if you're like me, you don't have one of those moments because you never needed geometry. Legitimately, what is it used for? What is it used for? Now, unfortunately, teachers cannot decide what hill they want to die on. They make the point that school is incredibly important, which it is. And they make the argument that the stuff that you learn in school is stuff you're going to use for the rest of your life, which is, true, not 100% true, but like 40, 50% true. But if you have a geometry teacher who tries to explain to you how this is useful in daily life, that is not a teacher. That is a professional liar. That is a professional con artist. 200 years ago, that teacher wouldn't have been a teacher. They would have been a snake oil salesman, selling fake potions and moving from town to town when people caught on to their lies. Now, somehow, the Geometry Teachers Union has managed to convince the public education system that geometry is useful and that they should all have jobs. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been duped. We have been duped. If you're a student right now, you're suffering through geometry. If you're a former student, you've suffered through geometry. If you're a taxpayer in this country, your tax dollars are going towards con artists. Con artists who preach lies about angles and number of sides and triangles. These people are sick. These people are sick. And you need to know that. Very important to know that. So I'm going to leave this episode here on that note. Like I've been lied to, you've been lied to, America's been lied to, the world has been lied to. We are all suckers. We are all suckers. Unfortunately. So think on that. Think on your life, think on everything. And please, if you use geometry, leave a comment. Let us know what you do. Let us know how you do it. I'm very curious. And I'm sure everyone else listening to this is as well. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you tomorrow.